Now, I'm very excited to introduce you to our speakers. First up, we have Edgar Villanueva. He's going to be joined in conversation with our own amazing Hunter Canning, and they're going to be discussing pride and how this amazing and cherished celebration needs to be decolonized. I cannot wait to hear this conversation. So Hunter, Edgar, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Meg. And Edgar, it's so good to see you again. Thank you for making the time. Happy Pride. How are you?
Great to see you. Happy Pride. All things being considered, which I feel like you have to say these days, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you.
Good. Yes, right. It's a different metric system that we're working on now. Yes, right. Absolutely. So it's going to be a fast and furious 25, 30 minutes here. And you're just such a delight to talk to. And I'm so grateful that you're here again. So thank you off the top.
Thank you, first.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, the Indigenous members of the LGBTQIA plus community, and how can our listeners, how can queer folks, allies, all the people, how can we support them? And that's where the big umbrella is today, right? And can you describe before we jump into that, your relationship and your identity as an Indigenous person? And I'd love to hear how that intersects with your own, identity, and how being a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, and how those communities intersect.
Yeah, we can definitely talk the whole 20 minutes around that question, but I'll try to keep it brief.
It's an unfair question, really.
Identity is a really interesting thing. As a Native person, I'm from the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. So not only am I Native American, I'm Southern, and I grew up in a part of the country where I was deeply influenced by a lot of the ideology in that part of the country, including sort of the evangelical church that I grew up in. And so I definitely want to say today that what I will share is very personal to my unique experience, and I can't speak for all Indigenous people. We have, over 500 tribes in this country. But I can definitely share my experience, as well as some of what I've learned from other folks who had quite a different experience in this country. But I will say for myself and for many folks that I've been in community with, when we think about identity, we often do lead first with our Native identity. So when I think of all the things I am, the fact that I am a gay man is kind of far down on the list, to be honest. It's not been a part of my identity that I've actually celebrated a lot historically, because of the community that I grew up in and the influence of the church. That's quite different from some of my good friends who grew up in tribal communities where Two-Spirit people culturally have always been accepted and celebrated. And so, like every community, we Native communities span the political perspective, from being more conservative to being more progressive. And I come from a community that is on the more conservative side. When you think about where North Carolina is on the map, we were the first point of colonization, and, colonization that happened in the name of the Christian church. And so my community has been sort of exposed to those types of ideas and ideology for a long time, and out of sort of a assimilation and survival, adopted some of those ideas. I do feel like in my own community in North Carolina, things are changing rapidly. I feel completely safe there. I don't feel that there's a lot of love and support and acceptance, but it is not. It is very much sort of conservative along sort of traditional Christian values. I will say for myself, and I think a lot of people from Native communities, and even, I don't want to speak for other identities, but I know with a lot of folks I work with in the Black community and otherwise, we do often lead by race, because although queer people have been marginalized, there are queer people who benefit from white privilege. And so more often than not, we're seen first by who we are in terms of our race and discriminated against there. So a lot of my organizing and focus has been around race, knowing that When we think about Indigenous or Black or other racial identities, that we are inclusive of queer communities and differently able communities and so forth and so on. So it's been a really interesting journey for me to just kind of sit in my identity in terms of a Native person. We are the only race and ethnicity in this country that has to prove to the federal government that we are who we say we are. Imagine having to provide the paperwork to prove that you're gay or queer, And so, just our racial identity is like, I'm in this box that is otherized, and that box of being other, I have to prove that I'm there, and it's a box that's under constant scrutiny by the government. Tribes can be approved by the federal government in terms of having status, and then that acknowledgement can be taken away. So it's really, in terms of identity, a struggle, but it's also a part of my identity that I feel the most proud of and connect with. And then there are times, to be honest, where I'm like, oh, and I happen to be gay, and a lot of unlearning or sort of decolonizing my thinking around that has had to take place in order for me to fully embrace the sort of intersectional awesomeness that really means to be all of these things at the same time.
Yeah. And I love that you just used the word decolonizing, right? And I feel though, some folks might associate that with the reversal of progress we made as humans, right? It's like, oh, we've taken care of the problem, right? Like, why are you trying to change things? And so for some folks, it can be threatening to think why do you want to try to mess with something that's already fixed? But I think we know that assumption is not true, that it's not fixed. And also decolonizing is not a threat. And so can you maybe talk about what does decolonizing, you said, decolonizing your brain, which I think, or your thinking, maybe you said, which is fascinating. So if you could talk maybe about that, share with us how other people can do that, but also what is that's maybe on the micro scam section. Then on the macro, what is decolonizing America, which is a huge topic, but if you can kind of zoom in and zoom out for us.
Sure. I mean, there are folks who think about the word or the act of decolonization in a really political kind of way, meaning that land should be given back to Indigenous people, and all of the rights and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples in this country should be respected and restored, and absolutely support that way of thinking. And sort of thinking about it in that way is not a threat, but more practically sort of moving away from the political. The way that I think about decolonization every day is really the process of sort of two things. One, unlearning, because we have learned so much that is not in a good way for us, and not just Indigenous people, but all of us have been sort of saturated with this ideology from the very founding of this country, ideas of white supremacy, ideas of sort of scarcity mindsets that sort of fuel greed and, these byproducts of capitalism. There's a lot that has been going on for 400 years on this land. And honestly, none of us we know no other way. This is all we've ever known. And so even when we may be taught differently and there are different worldviews that you may have, like I have, for example, as an Indigenous person, I still live and breathe this air. And there's so many messages that are internalized every single day, right, that contribute to me being a contributor or being silent around issues of race, homophobia, transphobia, you name it. So decolonizing is simply understanding there's been a very dominant, oppressive way of thinking that centers whiteness and dominance, and that is very oppressive, that we've all internalized. And so for Indigenous people, other people of color, for white people, all of us have to unlearn that. And queer people are very well situated to understand that, right? Because the identity of queerness or being a member of any part of the LGBTQIA, community requires, there's an experience there that we share of having sexuality and gender being put into like boxes or being perceived to be good, bad, or whatever based off of historical kind of orientations around these constructs. So that is, decolonization is really like unlearning and like opening our minds up. Prior to colonization, I want to say, kind of to your point about progress, before contact here on this land, indigenous communities were very civilized, contrary to the narrative around savages and all of this kind of thing, right? We had a certain way of, we had very progressive kind of communities and ways of being and taking care of the land and supporting and loving each other and interacting with other tribes. There was a civilization here that was very much intact, and there's so much innovation that we have brought forward in this modern age that stems back to ideas and practices and inventions from that time. So part of the problem with colonization is this mindset of that actually, I was in the UK a while back and talking to some folks in a pub about this. In the UK, white folks there were actually taught, we have this thing called the white man's burden. We are civilized. We have a spiritual understanding. We have a certain way of life that we must impose and take to the world to save everyone else from being savages or being uncivilized. If you watch The Crown, you might pick up on some of that as well, because that shows up in that show. And so this mindset of I need to go and force people to be a different way is like really dangerous, and it's very anti sort of where we are in the LGBTQ movement of being inclusive of all types of perspectives and ways of being. So that's what decolonization is kind of like trying to unlearn so much that we've kind of internalized. It's a process of truth and reconciliation. It's coming to terms with what has happened historically, especially to people of color in this country, land that was taken, people who were enslaved, all of the exploitation of poor people in this country, and having a process of reparations or repair around that, and healing. So I think of decolonization as both unlearning, and I think of it as actually healing. And that's a beautiful thing. Like we all need healing, and it's collective healing, right? It's not I'm healing over here, I'm taking something from you. It's like, no, we're all here now. It's the 21st century. We're all intertwined. Nobody's going anywhere. So what can we do to take ownership of the historical problems that we've inherited to collectively heal and move forward?
Yeah. Oh, so much in there. Like, so with, we're talking about unlearning, we're talking about colonization, decolonization, we're talking about, you mentioned reparations. We talked about, the queer community and the LGBTQIA plus community within the indigenous members. So, we also talked about scarcity, right? This false idea of scarcity and the threat, to pick up on the point of the threat and scarcity. So I think reparations on that topic for folks really does feel like scarcity, right? Like, oh no, there's not enough to go around, or, here's your land, or didn't we finish this, or whatever. So like, those are the misconceptions, right? So what are the real reparations where there isn't scarcity, where there is a way to improve where we're at now for the folks that have had so much taken away from them?
Yeah, it's such a true point. We're doing some research right now, narrative research around reparations and why that word feels triggering for folks. And you're right on. I think there's a sense when you hear that word, like, oh my gosh, someone's going to come and take what I have. And the truth is, many white people in this country work hard, and there are more poor white people in America than there are people of color. And so it's been an age-old sort of strategy to pit poor people and people of color against each other, when the truth is we are all in this situation together. We've all struggled, to have what we need to take care of our families. in different ways, right? Because the truth is there is a such thing as white privilege, and the economic policies and systems in place have provided advantages for white people that have not been provided to other people. That does not mean that all white people are rich and have everything they need, right? But it is a system that has tried to pit us against each other versus kind of looking where we need to be looking. And that's asking questions around where is wealth concentrated and who's really benefiting from these narratives and from pitting our communities together. Reparations just means repair. It means to fix something that's broken. It's a beautiful thing. And the truth is, our country is broken, y'all. Like, we are seeing a lot of division, a lot of things happen in terms of the way white supremacy is manifesting in ways that are really scary. And so the only way to really begin to address that is to think about repair. And repair, one tangible way to acknowledge repair is to apologize to some of the communities, like Indigenous communities and the Black community, who has really experienced the brunt of a lot of this inequality for the longest time in this country. And as a result of that, economically have been super distressed because we haven't had the same access to wealth building opportunities. Money impacts everything. And so making reparations and supporting those communities could be a step forward to sort of, acknowledging what has happened and the repair that needs to happen. It would take 200 years for the average Black family in this country to have the same amount of wealth as the average white family. So that just kind of goes, to show, as a result of so much history and policy and a system that's been rigged against certain folks, there are real tangible disparities that exist in communities' ability to have what they need to survive.
Yes. And like you said, I'm going to pick up, money informs everything. If you want to learn more about Edgar's research and work and commitment to this, you can check out Decolonizing Wealth. And you want to tell us a bit about that, Edgar, as well?
Yeah. So Decolonizing Wealth is a book I wrote in 2018, and since have launched an organization and a fund. And what we do is really help to distribute wealth back to communities of color, specifically Native American communities across the US and the Black community. It's a reparations-based model where we invite everyone to be a part of our circle of giving, whether you can give $5 a month or more, it doesn't matter. It's a place where we come together across class, across race, across identity, to have real conversations around what's going on in the country and what our roles specifically are to contributing to racial healing. And then with the money that we collectively raise, we redistribute that to organizations who have historically been marginalized from charity, and are working on frontline issues to build power in our communities to fight for the rights and for what we all need. And it's been remarkable with, we have 500 people in this community now. Most are giving smaller gifts because, people give what they can. And collectively, we've already raised $10 million that has gone to hundreds of organizations across this country who are just so badass and are doing fantastic work. And many of them are led by queer people who are serving queer people. And so it's just I'm really honored to be able to do that work. And there's a place for everybody in this process of healing. And that's what we're trying to do, is provide a place for people to plug in to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's such an incredible commitment you've made. And I highly encourage everyone listening, check out the book. Check out, Edgar's talked to, done, TEDx folks, and we talked about it one time. You can Google our conversation, just please check out Edgar's work. It's just truly incredible. And go to the website. You can contribute. You can participate if you have the means. You can participate. And I would love to hear about, Edgar. We are in Pride Month right now, and we're also talking about, the LGBTQIA plus community. And I'm interested to hear about how, when we're talking about colonization and how that impacted the Indigenous members in this community as well. And you also used the term earlier that I want to pick up, which is two-spirited. And some folks maybe hearing that for the first time. Can you talk a little bit about that lineage for us?
Yeah, I think it's for Two-Spirit folks, which some people identify as Two-Spirit, some, Native folks are, we're like everybody else in a sense, right? And, there are folks identify as a gay man. We have folks identify with all the different types of identity in the queer community. Two-Spirit is a really special sort of designation. And again, some folks may define this differently. This is how I understand it. Where it's a role in community that has, that a person who spans the gender spectrum, who often is seen as a gift in the community, often as a nurturer, a bridge builder, someone who brings the community together. Kind of sounds like queer folks in a way when you think about a lot of what we do. And so, we have different roles historically in our communities, from sort of the medicine people to, folks who are, govern the tribes. But Two-Spirit folks were often seen as very folks who facilitated healing and connection and nurturing across our communities, and have historically been people who are just deeply loved and appreciated. So, I'm currently exploring, do I actually identify as being Two-Spirit? I don't want to co-opt that because it's not a practice my tribe has, but I definitely strongly identify as a healer and a person that brings folks together. And, I think decolonization, when you think about the impacts of colonization, what colonization did is extract resources, and it really perpetrated ideologies of white supremacy. Like the colonizer virus, as I call it, or these ideas have permeated everything, right? So when we think about pride, Pride was started by a group of trans women of color, what it stood for and what it has come to mean. I really appreciate the call out and the accountability that is out there for us to remember what Pride was about and who started Pride. The thing is, in our community at large, there's still ways that white supremacy thinking manifests itself. And so there's an invitation for white members of the queer community to do your work around your white identity and to be a co-conspirator with us, the people of color in this community, to dismantle ideas of white supremacy. Any person of color probably in the queer community can tell you that they've experienced racism, microaggressions, so forth and so on from other members of the queer community. And that's something that we don't talk about a lot. But if we are to be a united community and to really, have the type of pride and celebration and unity that we all want to fight for our rights, it's important, especially for white members of this community, to understand how whiteness is operating and to make room and space for the brilliance of people of color and to make sure their voices are heard, and that the needs of those members of our community are really centered. You hear about it sometimes back around the fight for equality in marriage, which is like a huge victory that we often celebrate in our community. But when we look at information from that time and you talk to people of color who are queer, marriage equality was not a significant issue that people cared about. And I understand why people care, and and so glad that we won that, and it has opened doors for a lot. But for a lot of people who are people of color, they're also living in poverty. They're experiencing violence. And so what has been a priority for a lot of people of color in this community has been safety. It's been workplace protections. It's been economic security. And so we just have to be sure that what we're fighting for is also inclusive of other folks in our community. And especially if you have resources and you're not living in poverty, especially if you benefit from white privilege, I invite you at this Pride to just open up to ask yourself, how can you be a part of racial healing? How can you, as hard as you're fighting for pride, You know, I have a lot of friends who are like hardcore about every June, but then I'm like, well, where are you in November when it's Indigenous? Like, I need you to also fight for me over here. I need you to also help us fight for Black lives. We also need you to stand up for trans lives. And so just know that Pride is awesome. We're all here. We're going to celebrate. But there are opportunities for us to be intersectional in our support for human rights.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important I love that you highlighted, where Pride started, and that we are focusing back on, we wouldn't be here without the people that put in their bravery and paved the way and just like held our hands in a really tumultuous time. And I think it's often forgotten, like I think there's lip service to it, but then there's, okay, like you said, like, okay, back to now it's the next month and on to the next. And, we were talking about it earlier, just like this like, oh, the problem is fixed, right? Like we got marriage equality. Okay, so don't you have equal rights now? It's like, well, like you said, there's people that I don't know if I'm gonna have a roof over my head next month. So what are, if you could, for the people that you're inviting today to step up and ask themselves, how can they be helpful? Where, if they don't even know where to go right now, where some, obviously Decolonizing Wealth, I would highly recommend. They can check out the website. Where else, can they go as well?
Yeah, there are a number of amazing organizations across our community that are led by people of color and trans people that are specifically supporting, engaging, and lifting up the unique needs and the unique opportunities and brilliance that folks bring to this work. So wherever you live, I invite you to find those organizations. We also, of course, nationally, there are a couple of groups we can name and think of, like the National Trans Law Center and folks like that. But just, in a very personal way, it's like I ask folks to think about how, like, who's in your friend group, right? What are the messages you're putting out there in terms of your dating preferences? How are you using your money? Are you being intentional in where you're giving donations to, and who at work, decisions that you're making about vendors? There's so many decisions where we can take just an extra moment to say, okay, how can I advance like equality for everybody? By making a different decision, by maybe I'm going to hire a Black-owned business to, support me in this event. We have to get outside of our circles and not allow these ideas that colonization has kind of pushed us to like want to be in our communities and pit us against each other. We've got to push back from that and decenter ourselves in the work that we're doing. So it's everywhere, but definitely start local where you can, to find those nonprofits that are serving queer youth of color, trans youth of color. We can help connect folks if you can't find an organization that you want to be connected with, and ask yourself, how can I use what I have, whatever superpower you have, or whatever privilege you may have, to be a part of fighting for the rights, because we've made a lot of progress, y'all. We have so much to celebrate, but there's a large segment of our community that is being left behind and is under attack. And so we don't want to leave anybody behind. So let's take on that spirit of those folks that established Pride and that fight, and also that inclusiveness and love of bringing us all together.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Edgar. And how can people stay connected with you and what you do?
Yeah, I'm all over the socials. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, at Villanueva Edgar, my last name and first name. Decolonizingwealth.com is our website. We have a newsletter and lots of ways for people to plug into what we're doing there.
Perfect. Well, happy Pride. We're going to keep on fighting month after month, I hope, everyone. And thank you, Edgar, for making the time.
Thank you, Hunter. Happy Pride, everybody.